don't know if that set me up well or not, but so you may all be bracing for impact. But thank you so much, Pastor Chris. And I just want to say I don't take it lightly when you trust anybody to stand in this place. God's given you a charge and a calling on your life to shepherd this church and this house. We all trust you and love you and appreciate you, and so thank you so much. And would y'all help me just bring some honor to Pastor Chris and everything that he does for us? Thank you. All right. I want to open with just a quick prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you so much, Lord, for the freedom to worship here, for the community of worship here. I pray over our hearts and minds today that they would be free from distraction, that they would be able to focus, that we would be attuned to the Holy Spirit and what He wants to say and do here. Lord, I pray that it would be your words, not mine, your thoughts, not mine, because you are infinitely smarter, wiser, and funnier than I am. And all God's people said, Amen. Who were you before the world told you it wasn't okay to be that way? Really? Think back to your childhood. In your most innocent expression of self, who were you? Who did you want to be? Do you remember the moments that led to you becoming who you are now? Your personality? The masks that you wear? I have several that I can remember very clearly. I remember feeling, oh, okay, don't do that. That's weird. That's not okay. You're going to get hurt if you talk like that, if you think like that, if you act like that. The way I started was a marshmallow. Not a toasted marshmallow. That came later. But soft, squishy, and sweet. But somehow, through the course of life, as it does with all of us, we suffer traumas, small and large. I started to shape a story around who I was because of these things. Now, some may seem like, that's nothing, but it contributes, and you have your own. One of them, starting in school, every year, starting in the first grade, I went to the principal's office, mostly for talking. I tell people now I get paid to do what got me in trouble in school, which is quite fun. But it started to shape how I saw myself as I wasn't a good kid. I was bullied almost every year by classmates and eventually by teammates on soccer teams because I was different, because sometimes I would use big words. And I even had a Sunday school teacher who said, he goes, it's like, why are you using those big words? And I'm thinking, I was like, you're an adult. Why are you not smart enough to understand me? I still hold on to that. But started making, okay, so this isn't okay. I perceived pressure from my parents, whether they communicated it explicitly or not. As kids, we all pick up on things and messages that it wasn't okay to not get A's. The first B I ever got in my life was in like the 5th or 6th grade, and it was an 89. And I remember the conversation on the ride home when I got my report card, because I got that. And that wasn't okay, so I needed to make all these grades and attain certain things. And probably one of the couple of the biggest things were I was hurt in church. Surprise. We all have been. But prior to arriving here, the youth pastor who had really discipled me, who had helped lead me into the calling of ministry that helped me so much, was fired for no good reason from my church. And for the first time, I thought, wow, church is not a safe place. Bad things are going to happen to good people. Somehow that didn't seem right to me. And so I left attending any church for over a year. committed to never being there. Sounds very similar to some of the stories that you heard from Chris last week. Another one was, you remember your first love? That first real relationship where it wasn't just like, oh my gosh, we're going to hold hands. It was like, and it's not just pancakes, it's waffles or whatever cutesy, goofy stuff you make up when you think you're in love. But really when you have that first relationship. And I thought this was the person I was going to marry. Thank Christ I didn't. But during the course of that relationship, I was repeatedly verbally and physically abused. And she was a believer, I was a believer. We went to church. Looked great on the outside. It was hell outside of that. And I'm thankful to have gotten out of that situation and found my amazing wife now. So, I mean, if anybody deserves claps, it's her. But all of that takes a toll on your soul, doesn't it? All of that shapes this story, this belief of who I am and what I'm good for on this earth. And it's hard to ignore it because it's in your face. It's real, it's tangible. You can hold it, but you can't hold what God says about you. You're like, it's in a book, great. He was writing to some other dude who was wearing sandals covered in dirt. He wasn't talking to me in the 21st century. How can I hold on to God saying, I am more than a conqueror? How can I hold on to that? It feels like air. It feels like nothingness. And in the war of seeing ourselves accurately, it can feel like a losing battle because of how real those situations become to us, and they play over and over in our minds. One of the first times I got to really understand that, and I'm so grateful for so many things in this church. One of them, Corey Hooper, who's been like a father in the faith to me and been fantastic. Who, if it weren't for him, for Chris, Sam, I wouldn't be standing here. And most likely would not even be alive if we're being honest. But talked about the movies, the films that we play over and over in our heads about who we are. And are they, just as he was talking, we didn't discuss my sermon beforehand, but everything he said tees up so perfectly here that what we play over and over in our heads, what we put into ourselves, even if it's just us talking to us, will determine what comes out when the pressures of life, and they're guaranteed, by the way, right? Like the Bible tells us that. We are guaranteed trials and tribulations. I don't know why the two can't be separated, but they're always together. But they're going to come. So what do you do when all those traumas add up? Well, guess what? I became hyperfixated on having control over my life. Not letting anybody take advantage of me, not letting anybody exclude me, not letting anybody ever think they were ever better than me. Because if you could do something quickly, I could do it faster and with a greater weight and with a greater difficulty. Anything you can do, I can do better. And some of these things, and I guarantee you, I'm not saying this because I want a pat on the back from any of you, but I'm going to tell you a few of the things that it drove me to and what it cost. First of all, in school academically, I skipped the 8th grade. Didn't need it. I was UT Tyler's first student in their 40-year history to get a concurrent bachelor's degree, which means you get 2 4-year degrees in the same time it takes you to get one. I set a sales record at the first company I went to, which I was going door to door in the heat, which is stupid, selling electricity, but I set a sales record for the entire company nationwide in my second month. At one point, I got really into CrossFit and exercise. I've always enjoyed playing soccer and exercising, but I got really into CrossFit and started competing. In the last year, I was really active. I qualified for a local, like a East Texas tournament that was based on everybody competing for the national games. Obviously, I didn't make it. But for scaled men's in my division, I ended up finishing 9th in all of East Texas for men. In a later competition that is actually hosted on the same day globally, I was 33rd in the world. I started my first company when I was 27, which most entrepreneurs are in their mid-40s or late 40s whenever they start their first company, and in just 3 years scaled to over 6 figures with the help of some great people. Hannah and Chase were some of those people. They were fantastic. Couldn't have done it without them. But most businesses peak at about 50 to 60,000 a year. I made it to 5 years. 55% of businesses don't make it there. I sold my company. I helped the acquiring company scale in 2 years through COVID from high 6 figures to low 7 figures in one state into 6 states and 4 countries. And now starting a second company, already getting back to 6 figures. Less than 10% of the entrepreneurial population in the U.S. has built 2 of those type businesses before the age of 40. During all of that, Becca and I became foster parents, and we fostered 18 kids since we got started about 6 years ago. We've adopted 2 of those, and we have 3 biological. I also came on staff at the church. The first year I was involved fully was 2019. And man, we were rocking and rolling. Like it was, we were living high on the hog. And this place was full. Like Chris kept like squeezing in chairs. People got uncomfortably close to one another. And we grew a net of 25 to 30%, which is atypical for any church. The following year, we were on track to join the top 10% in terms of just total attendance, top 10% of churches in America by having over 400 people attend on a Sunday. This is all happening same time, and I'm saying this not again, I don't want your congratulations or appreciation or a pat on the back, but I wanted to take on everything that was the most difficult, everything that was the most challenging, everything that people said I couldn't do. I wanted to prove to you that you couldn't. I needed some salsa for the chip on my shoulder is what I'm saying. And in a recent conversation with Pastor Chris, we were talking about some of this and hard times and what happens when this comes on. I got to a place where I was like, you know what, I've been thinking about the story of Samson. He was strong, he was powerful, he was whacking people with the bones of dead animals. But at some point, he began to value the giftings, the power that he had way more than he appreciated the person who gave it to him, which was God. And that is the place I found myself. So what does this cost you? Becca and I have nearly divorced a couple of times, mostly because I would become an rageaholic. I would be angry. I would be set off. I was just wound so tight. I was unkind. I just wanted more of these things. I wanted more achievements, not more relationship, not a depth and an intimacy. I've entered counseling at least 3 times to deal with anger, to deal with grief, depression, and frequent suicidal thoughts. Eventually, I've had to go on antidepressants just to get some breathing room so that I could get up and provide for my family and just do basic things every day. I've questioned if God cares about me, if what I do matters to anybody, to this church, to Chris, to my wife, if any of this stuff even mattered anymore. I share all this to say, when we don't see ourselves as God sees us, it takes a toll mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. The totality of your life is affected by the way you see you and you talk about you and you think about you. God knows what he thinks. It's on us to get aligned with that, not him to get aligned with us. Thank you for the claps. Eventually, I became a marshmallow wrapped in razor wire. And unfortunately, several of you in here have been the recipients of a few of those barbs, for which I apologize. So we're going to move quickly. There's a lot for us to get into. So you'll forgive me if I start speaking quickly. Sometimes the microphone turns upside down. I look like I'm about to be in a rap battle, so you'll forgive me. It is recorded, and you can play it at half speed later. But we need to talk about what is self-perception. The definition is self-perception refers to how we view and understand ourselves, including our abilities, our characteristics, and our overall worth. How is it formed? Self-perception is formed through experiences, feedback from others, and internal narratives that we construct. I have an image where it shows, the classic graphic of an iceberg. Like, what do we see that's above the surface and below the surface? And what's above the surface is small compared to what is below. I know that's a big word, psychodynamic. Don't let it intimidate you. But we see behavior and personality at the surface, and these are the things that help us survive and thrive through the world, but what's driving it may in fact be fear and anxiety. The impact is that it will influence our behavior, our decisions, our interactions with others, and it often shapes the path of our life and relationships, which are... So how do we keep this awareness around how we are affecting the world and who we are? And so I don't know if they already showed it. If you can put that image up there, please. As we understand ourselves as individuals and become more self-aware, which there's a leading study about the success rate of like Fortune 50, Fortune 100 companies, self-awareness has come out consistently as the top predictor of success. But once we do that, we can change our behaviors. Once we're aware of something, we can make a difference in it. And then that moves down into team. But you see, it's not just teams. It's teams, groups, and families. Self-aware people support positive group dynamics. They're better at communicating, managing conflict, and making decisions effectively. Wouldn't you love to be better at managing conflict, effectively navigating through it? And once you do that, then you can become a part of an organization, like a church. When you understand that, it's not just organization, it's also community. You're all a part of different communities once you leave this building. You're a part of a work community. You may be a part of small groups, affinity groups, playing sports or anything else. Is that when we are able to make it to that place, we're able to affect change in the culture, not just in our little section of the world. Now, I'm going to give you a quick run through of something that is going to help us with this. Again, if you want to talk to me about this afterwards, because some of this flows into what I do professionally as a coach for leaders and teams, is using something called the Enneagram. I'm willing to bet many of you have heard about it. You maybe have even taken like a free assessment. I'd love to talk to you about why that free assessment is wrong. I believe everybody's entitled to be wrong. But the Enneagram is a personality framework that helps us understand different points of view. And there are 9. Ennea meaning 9. Gram just means diagram. So don't let the image fool you on it meaning anything more than just the literal definition of those two parts of the words coming together. They each have their own core motivation. So behaviors are one thing. Motivations are very different. So, for instance, Chris and I now have both preached on a Sunday, but we are motivated very, very differently. The purpose here is in understanding this, we can gain an awareness of how we're motivated in each situation that we're a part of, which allows us to change the trajectory. If we're in an unhealthy state, if we're exhibiting unhealthy behaviors because we see that a negative motivation has been activated, we can change it. Also, I selfishly, or this is my own opinion, but so many of the tests that we take for work, or even here at church, like they're great. We have a spiritual gifts assessment that we're going to take during that next class. There's so many of these things that say, here's the box you're in. You're in this box, that box, and the other box. Great. Now what? But those are your boxes. Enjoy them. I don't know why people talk like that. But this will show you the box you're in and how to get out. And truth be told, outside of my faith, this has been the most helpful and influential tool to my growth and development as a person, as a leader, as a husband, as a father, business owner, friend, any of those things. It has changed the trajectory of my life because I could become aware of when I was on autopilot and letting these core things at the center of me dictate my narrative, my story, when those trauma stories hijack my emotions and everything else, and I'm like, nope, I'm going to do this. Like, well, why? Was it from a virtuous place? Nope. All right, well, I probably should second guess that, shouldn't I? So I want to share with you the 9 types and some biblical characters that I believe align with them that you could look at, their core belief, and then some practices that can help you if you find yourself aligning with one of these 9 types and you can go, hey, this is something I want to try this week because I'm all about practicality. So we're going to start with my type, which is the type 8, known as the active controller. And there's going to be a graphic for each of these that they'll put up. But the biblical example is Samson, right? Fully capable, exhibited strength, intensity, but he struggled with self-control. Over on the right-hand side, you'll see some questions to figure out if that's your type. Again, you can, when we post this on YouTube or Facebook, you can watch this back, or you just come talk to me. But you can see that we're aimed at getting control when we're type 8s, right? In an unhealthy state, I have to say, like, the world's unsafe, I'm going to grab the control for myself. The core belief I have is, in order to be safe, I must be in control. Now, we all know that that's false and stupid, but it's how I've lived so much of my life. Samson had all that strength, and it wasn't until they gouged his eyes out and he's chained to these 2 columns that he finally said, Lord, give me one more, time to feel the strength that you blessed me with. And finally, those strengths, those giftings that he had developed were submitted to the Lord and used virtuously. The type 9, which my wife happens to fall into this camp, is the adaptive peacemaker. That's a beautiful, there's probably more to be explored about why the Lord would pair an active controller with an adaptive peacemaker, but we don't have time for that. Jonah is an example, and I know these are negative examples, and that's where we're starting, because it's a little easier to see our negative behaviors out in the world, isn't it? Those are a little more loud and proud and on display. When we look at the adaptive peacemaker, we can look at Jonah. Jonah was told to go here and deliver this tough message, and he was like, hard pass, and booked himself a ticket on a boat, and the rest of the story, he ends up getting swallowed by a whale. But you see, I must create harmony. I must avoid conflict, because they believe my presence doesn't matter unless I maintain peace. That's a tough thing to have floating below the surface. A lot of times these type 9 personality types end up forgetting themselves and floating into the distance because they believe, well, my opinion and my thoughts don't matter. The type 1, the strict perfectionist, this may be your engineers. Accountants flow into this quite a lot. Paul is an example here. If you read in Philippians, he talks about, if anybody has reason to boast in their ability, I have more. He was a Jew's Jew. Like everything within their tradition, he had done perfectly to the letter. So much so that he was like, I'm going to kill Christians because they're violating this, that, and the other thing. And of course, the Lord had to get his attention, put scales on his eyes and let him roll down a sandy hill. I must be perfect. I must not make mistakes. They're motivated by doing the right thing, right? The world is bad and wrong, and I must help make it right. Their core belief is, I must be perfect and right to be worthy. Worthy of what? Probably of love. That's a tortured existence, isn't it? The type 2s, the considerate helpers. The Good Samaritan, right? We know that so many of those religious leaders passed by the man who was beaten and robbed on the side of the road and left for dead. They just kept on about their business, but Samaritan stopped, picked him up, carried him, got him help, paid for his care. And you may say, well, shouldn't we all be doing that? Yeah, to some extent. Yeah, I believe that we should, but there are some that are so keen on individual people's needs. They will know your needs before you do, which is slightly annoying, at least to my type. But like, hey, you need this. And I was like, that's rude. Who told you? I didn't share this with you. But they can be motivated virtuously, but typically where it starts is I must help and please others in order to be loved, which if you think about it is really manipulation. They're giving to get. Type 3s, which I did ask permission to share people's types, but our fearless leader, Pastor Chris, falls into this category of the competitive achiever. An example is Jacob. Now, Jacob, if you remember, was a son of Isaac. His brother Esau was the firstborn, so by law was supposed to get the blessing. He ends up like tricking his dad and getting his brother to sell his birthright for a bowl of soup. I hope that soup was amazing. It better been like chef's kiss. Like it just better be something great. But he colluded with his mom to deceive his dad into receiving the blessing. Why? Because he needed his gold star. He needed to be better. He needed to achieve. He needed to check a box, right? And so often our type 3s can fall into, I must succeed to be valuable. That what you do and what you've done is what makes you valuable, not who you are. And I've already heard this morning because Miss Barbara was speaking some very kind words towards our pastor. But Chris, we love your sermons and we love the service that you provide to the church, but who you are is infinitely more valuable than anything you've ever done or will do. Thank you. Type 4s, the intense creative. These people love sad music and being melancholy. Have you ever known that person? It's like, hello, darkness, my old friend. It's like cheer up, dude. And they're like, cheer down. Like, I don't know what's going on. Joseph and his coat of many colors. He was different. He was different from the rest of his brothers. He was treated differently. He was sold into slavery, sold to Potiphar, who sort of was like the COO of Egypt, had sexual assault allegations thrown at him by Potiphar's crazy wife, was put in a dungeon. Like, he went through so much stuff. He had plenty to be sad about. And a lot of our 4 friends, they will see, oh, I must be unique to be seen and to be valued. I must be authentic. I just got to. You ever had somebody who's like, I think you're trying to be too authentic. You've gone the other direction, friend. Reel it back in, okay? Like, stay on this planet. They will overdo it on the individuality, which I think can be something our world is struggling with a bit. It comes from a place of insecurity and really them saying, everybody else has something that somehow I wasn't given and I'm missing. That's a terrible place to live from. It's painful. Our 5s, the quiet specialist, makes it sound like it's Liam Neeson from Taken. I have a particular set of skills. Thomas needed evidence of Jesus' crucifixion, said, show me the scars, show me the wounds. Our 5 friends, they are deeply concerned with knowing enough because they believe if I must know enough and understand enough to be safe. They may never say anything, do anything with it, but so long as they can obsessively read and understand and learn, then they're okay. Must understand, I must conserve my resources, right? These people can get into isolation quickly. Type 6, the loyal skeptic. Now, there's some teachers who say that there are more 6s in the world than any other number. And I can understand why. Even some have said that the United States used to be a more 3-driven, achievement-oriented society and culture, and we have now turned to a 6 culture. And as you look around, I think that they might be right, and especially as we are now in an election year, and I'm not taking a political stance on this, but to say so many politicians will appeal to, if there are more 6s, to their fear. And this type deals with fear more than any other type. Their core belief is, I must find security and support to be safe. So what do we do when we hear politicians say, well, the country's going to go to hell in a handbasket if the other side wins? And in doing so, will get you to go their direction because they've told you and activated some fear over here. That's not a great reason to vote for anybody or make any decision, right? Let alone leaders of our country. Finally, type 7, the enthusiastic visionary. The photo for the visionary or enthusiastic visionary is quite fun because they look like they're doing the little Mario jump, thing. That's going to be that's the thumbnail for this sermon now, is just me doing that jump. But look at King Solomon's life. Chased everything imaginable, amassed more wealth than anybody in the history of the world. I mean, there's still people who tried to show what his wealth would be like in today's society, and he would be easily rivaling Bill Gates and Elon Musk and all of these uber wealthy people in our world. But he had 100 wives. I don't know why anybody would want that. But riches, slaves at that time was a show of wealth and sign of power. He had goats and sheep and cows and cattle and every sign possible. But he talks about in Ecclesiastes that he found it all unfulfilling in the end. He just bounced from one thing to the next. And their core belief is, I must seek pleasure and avoid pain in order to be happy. And if you go back and you listen to, or just remember Pastor Chris's message from last week, he talks about the difference between joy and happiness. There is a difference. So where does this leave us with these types? If you found yourself in one of these types, ultimately, all of us end up chasing an idealized image, which you'll see for all 9 types up on the screen. Like for me, I can do. 7s are I'm okay. 5s, I'm wise. Right? These are the things that in an idealized state we're thinking about ourselves like, oh yeah, that's me, and I am awesome. But it's often not from a virtuous place. Instead, because fear is in the driver's seat, and we have core fears for all 9 types, mine is being vulnerable. That first part of the message, I didn't like sharing that with any of you, but it's a practice for me. I don't like asking for help. I'm awkward to help. If you're like, how can I help you? By not asking me that question. So that core fear activates our defense mechanisms, right? Automatically, without thinking. In my case, I'll deny. I'm not in pain. I'm not stressed. I'm not incapable of doing this. 3s, I'm going to over-identify. Look at all of my achievements. Look at what all I've done. 9s, narcotization. Basically, they numb out. They'll watch too much TV or something else. We end up with a distorted set of principles when we live like that. So mine is individualism. It's harmed my marriage. It's harmed my ability to parent, to be close to people, to have friendships, because I was so much of an individual. Now, is having your own strength and ability good? Yes. Is overdoing it good? No. So I'm going to go through some practices that each type can go through, and you may find one that you're like, hey, that sounds interesting, or I was reading about that, or I've been thinking about doing that, and this is the confirmation for you to do it. But it's helping you answer the question, what do you do when your personality doesn't help you as much as it once did? It's got a shelf life. And it's up to you on whether or not you're going to change it and to start to see yourself and your giftings as God sees you, or to continue living in your personality, which, truth be told, is just a mask so you can get by. So for 8s, their virtue is innocence. They can practice vulnerability and a reliance on God and his strength instead of their own. Something to do might be to confide in a friend. That's why I point out Chris and Sam and Corey. I can confide in them, and that helps me take a step towards not being so self-sufficient. 9s need to take initiative and assertiveness. Their virtues right action, so they can be fully alive and aligned with Christ. Might set small achievable goals every day or every week that they can do and to keep themselves going. 1s, serenity, instead of being angry at themselves for not being perfect, is that they can start to practice self-compassion and acceptance for those small imperfections all around them. They might have a daily practice of reminding themselves that God's grace covers everything. We look at the 2s. They will be so focused on serving everyone else, they'll forget themselves, or they will have unhealthy boundaries. So setting some healthy boundaries and prioritization of self-care can help them live from a place of humility, that I love helping, but you don't need me. It's just a benefit to the relationship. So they might schedule times for things that would feed their soul and give them energy and prayer and reading and things like that. The 3s, truthfulness, not believing their own hype. Just kidding. That's like that time when you say something about marriage and you're like elbowing your spouse. But reflecting on your achievements and asking yourself, do they align with my true self and who God says I am? Or was I chasing this because I wanted the praise and the attention from others? 4s, they need to cultivate gratitude and contentment. There might be a gratitude journal. These people probably love to journal. Instead of journaling all the sad things, journal all the things you're grateful for. We just sang a great song, Gratitude. 5s, not being attached. And you may say, well, they're already distant and isolated, but they need to engage with others and share their resources. They have wisdom. They have things to offer, but they'll just hoard it to themselves because that's where it's safe, because sharing feels risky. So they might need to participate in community activities like small groups, or like yesterday's outreach, and things like that are great baby steps. And we always talk about next steps. Those are great next steps for you to take. 6s, they need to trust in God's protection for them over and above somebody else saying, hey, you're safe, or trusting in the whoever the president or local authorities are to say you're safe. Trust that God is your protector more than man, more than an entity or your work or even your church. We may express that, but ultimately you're protected by God. And finally, 7s, sobriety is their virtue. They practice embracing discipline and presence. They can sit in one place. It's great to reframe things and find the positive, but when you do so at the expense of actually sitting in the experience that you've had, and whether it's negative, especially if it's negative and hurtful, skipping past it doesn't fix it. It just means you're not focused on it, and it will come back to bite you, and y'all know the truth of that. Now, is this a magic bullet? No. I believe this helps us understand the outline of how God created each of us in his image and likeness, and how we get to reflect that here on the earth. We don't all need to be Chris. We don't all need to be Corey. We don't all need to be Sam. God created us to be who we are, and we need to be okay with that and leaning into that, because otherwise there's a constant disconnect with your Creator. So find something this week that you can do to gain awareness. Whether it's this or something else you have found helpful. I love the quote that says, all models are flawed, but some are helpful. Right? So I challenge you this week, pick one step, one small thing, one baby thing, as you think about how you're wired and your own story that you've told about yourself, and you question, well, is that really how God sees me, or is that how I see me? What can you do to align that a little bit more this week? You don't have to solve it all, just a little bit.